Hi, welcome back, guys. This is your friend. Caller, what if with another fiction? What if Deku was bitten by radioactive cider and became Spiderman? Now, before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now, let's get into the fanfic. Go take a swan dive off the school's roof. I'm sorry, young man, but you can't be a hero without a quirk. Those were the words that shook Izuku Midoriya's heart. Izuku was now walking out of the building that he was on and was depressed, without him knowing that a weird spider was crawling towards his leg and bit him in a vein. Oh, Izuku said as he brushes the spider off of him. He continues walking until he starts to feel dizzy. He bumps into a girl that seems to be his age. She then says, "Hey, watch where you're." She stopped in mid-sentence when she see him about to collapse. She then in quick thinking uses her quirk, or some would think, to stop him by enlarging her hand and stopping him. She puts him down gently and goes down to him and starts doing the Heimlich maneuver and says, "Hey, stay with me." He then starts to cough and open his eyes to see a long brown hair girl with brown tan skin close to his face. Izuku blushes as the girl asks him, "Hey, are you okay? Your face is red." Izuku nodded and says, "Um, well," the girl tilts her head. "You're awfully close." Her face becomes red, and she backs away while Izuku gets. She scratches the back of her head and says, "Well, I hope that you're okay." Izuku then says, "Yeah, fine, thank you." She then starts to walk away and Izuku then says, "Hey, I never got your name." The girl turns around and says, "Kamala-Khan." "And you?" Izuku then says, "Izuku Midoriya." "How long have you been here in Japan?" Kamala then says, "For 4 days, so well, I better leave. I don't want you to associate yourself with a quirkless person like me." Izuku's eyes widen, and he then says, "I'm quirkless too." Both of their eyes meet in a constant stare into the other's eyes. Kamala stared into the emerald eyes of knowledge, while Izuku stared into her chocolate brown eyes of wonder. They stopped when they heard a woman saying, "Kamala, hurry up." The woman is wearing a scarf over her head, and she somewhat looks like an older Kamala. She walks up to her and says, "Kamala, what is taking you so long?" Kamala then says, "Mom, I..." She stops when her mother sees Izuku and says, "Oh, I know now, you were talking to this nice boy." She then looks at Izuku like she was trying notice something was off about him. He has an adorable face. "You two will make great grand babies." They both blush and Kamala then says, But me and Izuku aren't dating, we just met." Her mother raises her eyebrow and says, "Oh, you two are on a first name basis, huh?" Kamala is flushed red, and her mother then says to Izuku while holding his arm, "Look at you, dear, you all skin and bones. I have an idea. Why not head to our place tomorrow to give us a tour around Mutsufu? And afterwards we can have dinner at our place. And you can be close to your girlfriend," she says mischievously. Izuku looks at Kamala, and she shakes her head no to him. B then says, "Sure, why not?" Kamala's mother then says, "Ooh, I like him. Come along, Kamala. We still need to unpack." Kamala then says to Izuku, "You know she'll think that you and I are dating, right?" Izuku then says, "I know, but I didn't want you or your family getting lost," so gives her a big smile. Why not help a new neighbor? Kamala blushes and puts her hand on her chest and clutches it and says to herself, "OMG, he is so pure." Kamala's mother then says, "Kamala, we need to go before the food expires," she says as she honks on the honker. As Kamala walks to the car ashamed, her mother then says, "Izuku, do you live very far? I can take you to your house, and you and my daughter can get to know each other some more." They both blush at this idea, and then Izuku says, "Thank you, but I'll stick with walking." He then walks away while Kamala sees him off and gets into the car. Kamala, as she was in the car, says to her mother, "Why? Why did you do that to the poor guy? He must think I'm weird now." Kamala's mother then says, "Oh, come on, I took a good look at him, and I never got that from him. And he will make a great son-in-law." Kamala groans. She then says, "Mom, you know that we just moved in. It's not like I want to find a man in an instant." Kamala's mom then says, "I know, honey, but still." When a woman looks for a man, he needs to be every bit of an ideal man. From what I can tell, this boy is an innocent boy. Sure, he's shy, but he does seem emotional, and some girls find that sweet. And don't think I noticed that smile of his. Every girl would love to have to wake up every day to see that smile. Who knows, maybe you will fall in love with him in time. But you should get to know him, see what he is. Because when you find out that he's the man of your dreams, it will be too late. Kamala thinks for a moment, then stops when the car stops. Izuku was walking up the stairs to his apartment to head to his room. After he puts the key in, he walks in to see that his mother in Midoriya was not in the house. He then see on the counter that there was a note for him that read, "Dear Izuku, I'm sorry, but I'm heading to the market and have to do some other stuff before heading home. I should be back somewhere at night. I left some food in the fridge in case you were hungry. Love you, mother. P.S. We were invited for dinner at the new neighbors tomorrow." Izuku puts down the note and head to his room. As he walks into his room, he then sees his All Might collection. He was about to head to his desk and work on homework, but then he slips on a pencil. He was about to fall when he was stopped and heard a thwip in midair. He looks around to see that there was a web line like a spider coming out of his wrist. The web line landed on the wall, helping to stop his fall. He then gets up and places his hand on the bed sheets. He tries to lift his hand up, but then he notices that his hand is stuck on the sheets. He removes his hand from the web string and tries to remove his hand from the bed sheet. After 5 minutes, he finally removes the sheets off of his hand. He begins to examine his hand and his wrist to find out how did this happen. His consultation was stopped by someone ring his doorbell. He goes over to the door and used the peek hole to see who it is, and it was far to say that it was Kamala. 5 minutes earlier, Kamala was walking up the stairs while her mother was ahead of with most of the groceries bags. Kamala was waiting for her to put the key into the lock and unlock the door. She then notices the same green-haired boy from earlier and thinks to herself, wait, we go to the same apartment, and he's a few doors down. She then sees him walking to his apartment and closes the door. Kamala and her mother walks into their apartment and set the groceries on their new counter. Her mother then sees Kamala's face as she was shocked. Her mother then asks, "What's wrong?" Kamala turns to her mother and says, "We're a few doors away from Izuku Midoriya." Kamala's mother then says with a smirk, "Looks like it was fate. You should go over there and say hi to that boy." Kamala builds up the strength and head to Izuku's apartment door and rings his doorbell. Now, Izuku opens the door and asks Kamala, "Kamala, wait, what are you?" He was cut off when Kamala interrupted him by saying, "We live a few doors from each other." He then peeks out of his apartment and sees that Kamala's mother leaning on the door looking like a secret agent. Izuku then says, "Oh, so you're the new neighbors that we're having dinner with." Kamala then asks one thing to her new neighbor. "What? What?" Kamala asks Izuku. She then hears her mom saying, "Kamala, I need your help with a cellar phone. I'm trying to, how the kids say, can I send the tweet at my home dog home slice?" Kamala is embarrassed, then says, "Okay, then I'll see you tomorrow." Then Izuku says with a slight blush, "Yeah, I will." They then take their separate ways. Izuku closes the door behind him and slumps down and says, "Oh God, why does my life have to be this complicated?" He gets himself up by using the wall to lift himself up, but found his hand is stuck on the wall. He then says to himself, "Okay, if I learned anything from watching my classmates using their quirks, is that quirks are deprived from emotions. So, if that's the case for me, then I need to calm down and relax." He then takes a deep breath in and out. He does this at least 3 times, and soon after his stuck was freed from the wall. Deku then takes a breath of relief and heads to his room. He then looks at his wrist to look for where did the web may have gone out of, but no such luck. He goes into his room and work on his homework for the day. Soon after he was finished with his assignments and wanted to relax for a little while. He was about to open the door to his room, but he stops when he thinks that the doorknob will be stuck to his hand. He takes a deep breath and opens the doorknob without it being stuck to his hand. As he walks into his living room, he looks up at the ceiling and looks at his hands and wondered if he could do something else with his new sticky hands. He was about to place a hand on the wall when decides to not try this at home and risking breaking something. He then thinks to himself, I'm going need to find someplace else to try out his new powers. I'm calling him Deku because I'm used to it. As he prepares to examine his powers, he writes a note for his mother telling her that he'll be right back in a short amount of time. He then picks up a jacket that his father worn back when he was his age. The jacket was partly red with black parts that goes under the armpits that goes to the back of underneath the shoulders and to his waist. He then leaves his apartment. Deku continues to walk for a while until he stumbles across an abandoned factory that would seem perfect for his training. As he gets closer to the factory, he then sees a fence. He then tries to climb it by jumping over it, but finds himself achieving the jump, but ends up landing 10 feet away from the fence and landing on his feet. He turns his head back to see that he made it over the fence. He then starts to go to the factory. Deku stops as he faces a closed door. He thinks all hope is lost, but it ended when he pushes the door, causing it to be open. He then looks door on the floor inside and sees that the lock was broken by him. He then says to himself, okay, weird. He walks inside. He then starts his training and writing down what his powers were. Unknown to Deku, the factory was being guarded by a 52-year-old security guard who saw Deku jumping over the fence in the darkness. He goes to where Deku was at opening the door. As he gets closer to the door, he looks down and sees that the door's lock was broken. He panics and heads to a security check-in up front of the factory. He goes inside and his shaking hands grabs the phone and tries to punch in the numbers of 911 and calls them. As the operator comes on, the guard says with fear in his voice, I need to report of both a breaking and entry and possible villain with super strength. He broke the lock on the door like it was nothing. Please, I need backup here. It's only 1 hour away from the city. Please hurry, I have a family. The operator then says over the phone, I hear you, sir. Don't worry, help is on the way. He hangs up the phone. On the other line, the operator then makes contact with SWAT and 2 pro heroes. Attention all units. We have a breaking and entry in the abandoned factory off of East Woods. We have a possible villain with super strength. Calling in SWAT along with 2 pro heroes to best handle this situation. All units be advised, suspect may be armed and extremely dangerous. Please take precautions, she says as she hangs up. After an hour of training, he then says as he writes in his notebook, okay, so I can climb and walk on walls. I have agility. From what I can tell from the lock, it looks like I have superhuman strength. And from what else I can tell, it seems that the superhuman part also applies to my speed. Then there's the web line. Maybe it's not just a web line, maybe I can use it for something other than swinging around. I wonder what else I can do with my new powers. His training stops when he notices red and blue light outside that were shining through the window. He then climbs on the wall up to the window and looks out of the window, and was blinded by a helicopter light. Then a police officer says through a microphone, to whoever is inside, we know you're inside. Surrender now, we have pro with us. Give up now and don't try anything funny. Deku's head started to hurt for a second, but stops when a canister is thrown into a window from the outside. When the canister landed on the ground, it shot out a gas that made Deku cough. He then jumps down to the ground and quickly grabs his stuff, and not leaving anything behind. He was about to leave from the way he came out of. But then his headache got worse, almost as if it told him no. He turns to the other direction and heads to another part of the factory. As he does so, the number 2 hero Endeavor walks in and spots the door that Deku came into was still open. Deku stumbles around and is still trying to get out, until he looks up to see that there were multiple police officers on the roof on the skylight. He then spots a ski mask with only the eye hole visible on one of the tables along with a pair of sunglasses along with biker gloves. He puts the sunglasses on first, then the ski mask, finally the gloves. As he makes his way to an exit, the door opens to see the pro hero Eraserhead. Deku backs away, but Eraserhead activated his quirk, which caused his hair to stand up to cancel out Deku's quirk. Eraser then uses his binding cloth against Deku, but then his senses told him to doge. He doges his cloth, which surprises Eraser, because he could have sworn that he used his quirk on him. Deku then makes his way to the door that he came through, but stops when Endeavor walks in. Endeavor then says as he examined Deku, "So you're the weakling that we were sent in here for, huh? Eraser, why haven't you captured him?" Deku then goes to one of the walls, but was nearly stopped when Endeavor tries to shoot a fireball at him. But Deku dodges it because of his senses. He does a 180 with his superhuman agility and lands on the wall and starts to run across the wall, while Endeavor tries to hit him with his fireballs. Eraser then says, "I tried, but he dodged my scarf. What's most odd is that I tried to capture him after I used my quirk on him, but he still managed to dodge with his quirk." Endeavor's eyes opened in shocked, then says, "It looks like he has two quirks, one to allow him to stick on the walls and one that gives him agility. Odd combination." Deku then shocks them when he shoots out a web line by putting his figures into like a surfer's pose and bends his hand down. Then web lands on the window. Deku then pulls in and goes out the window from the skylighting. He breaks the window and lands on the roof, and leaving a pile of broken glass on the roof. He looks up to see multiple SWAT units with riot shields were in front of him, and were prepared to take him down. One of the SWATs shouted, "Get him!" They all surrounded Deku and charged at him. Deku tried to use his super strength, but the riot shields were too strong for him. Then one of the SWATs came behind him and tried to tackle him, but Deku does a back flip over the SWAT units, or trying to take them down from the back. Then a news helicopter came into play by hovering at the right side of the roof. He then runs to the edge as fast as he can, but then a SWAT unit goes in front of him. Unknown to Deku, his fist started to glow under the gloves. He then reels his hand back and punches the SWAT unit's shield, causing him to fall back and almost landing on the ledge. He then takes a leap of faith and jumps off the building. He then shoots out a web line underneath the helicopter and swings on to some lamp posts and heads towards the city. After he left the factory, Endeavor and Eraserhead are on the roof, see the Deku swinging away. Eraser then says to Endeavor, he has now been seen with either 3 or 4 quirks. We need to call the Hero Association and spread the word. Endeavor nods his head and asks, "And don't forget that he was able to use his quirk with you erasing it, but still able to use, that must be some quirk. What do you suppose is his real quirk?" Eraser shrugs his shoulders while calling the Hero Association and says, "Nothing good, I hope." Back with Kamala and her mother. After Kamala and her mother went back inside, they began to unpack both their groceries and their moving boxes. During the entire time of packing, Kamala had a red face. She kept on thinking to herself, oh my God, we're in the same apartment. Which means I can just walk over to his place without worrying about being late. Wait, why am I so happy? What's wrong with you, Kamala? You're supposed to be a part of the Avengers, not some weird schoolgirl. During the entire time, her mother kept on looking at her as she cooks in the kitchen. She then says, as she has a smug look on her face, "Don't think that just because he's so close that you can sneak out at night and see him." Kamala then eep at what her mother just said. She turns to her mother and says, "What are you talking about? We just met and already you're talking about something that weird schoolgirls do." Her mother then says, "Relax, Kamala. I'm just teasing. Now help me prepare dinner for when your father and brother returns." Kamala gets up and heads to the kitchen, and then after a word, "I'll just go ahead and tell your father that it's time for the talk with you." Kamala's jaw dropped to the floor and became frustrated during half of the cooking. 1 hour later. Kamala is now finished unpacking half of their stuff in both her parents, and her room is now sitting on the living room couch while her mother is setting the table. She then reaches for the remote and turns on the TV. As the television is on, her mother then asks her daughter, "So how long will you play the quirkless card with Izuku?" Kamala sits up and turns to her mother and says, What are you talking about?" Her mother then walks over to her and hugs her and says, "Sweetheart, I know that you have powers about a year ago. And I also know about the Avengers internship." Kamala then says, "Please don't tell Papa, he wouldn't understand." Her mother shakes her head and says, I know. The reason why I haven't told him is because I think that his little princess should be the one to tell him." Kamala then shakes her head and says, "But I'm not a little girl anymore. I'm a young woman now that has powers that came in late. I want him to know that I'm not someone who needs a prince in shining armor or—" Then the doorbell rang. They both looked at each other. Then Kamala went over to the door and peeks through the peeping hole to see who it was. She claps her hands and opens the door. Kamala POV. I was shocked that she opened the door to someone that I think that they just met. When she opens the door, a small chubby long green-haired woman with a ponytail walks and holding a tray. She turns to my mom with a smile and says, "Oh Munib, I'm so glad that you invited us over." My mom looks confused and says, "Wait, I thought we said tomorrow." The woman, who oddly looks confused, then says, "No, we agreed today. Oh, don't worry about it. I'll come by tomorrow then." My mom stops her and says, "Don't say that you already brought the food. And the dinner I was making is almost done. We can move the dinner party today. I just need to call my husband and tell him." Kamala came to meet our new neighbor. I walk over to them and extend my hand out, and me and the woman shake hands. "Kamala, this is Inko. She lives down the hall." "Inko, this my youngest daughter, Kamala." Inko smiles at me and says, "Nice to meet you. So how old are you?" I then said, 14 years old. She then says, "Oh, you're practically my son's age. He's really sweet, you would like him." Now she said that. I then asked her, by any chance do you know Izuku Midoriya by any chance?" Inko's eyes widened, then asked, "Izuku, he's my son. How do you know him?" She then says to herself, "Oh my god, I'm meeting his mother. They both look a lot like each other." My mom nudges my arm and says, "Oh, believe it or not, our children met today. And that my daughter caught your son before falling and wound up telling her that he'll take us out for a tour around Japan." I look at my mom until Inko out of nowhere hugs me and says, "Oh, anyone who helps my son must be the nicest person ever." Inko takes a good look at me. "Aw, your adorable face and my son's smile. You two will make the cutest of babies ever. I'm going to be a grandma." I looked at her with a giant blush while my mom and Inko were talking about what kind of baby clothes would look great on them, while I was even more embarrassed by what just happened. I mean, we just met and already we're talking about kids. I mean, come on. We all stopped when we heard the news saying, "We interrupt this channel with a special report." We all went silent. All of us walked over to the living room and sat on the couch and watched the news. We just received a report that both the Flaming Hero, Endeavor, and the Eraser Hero, Eraserhead, have entered the abandoned building on 53 off the highway, is answering a report about a potential villain with a form of super strength. Then in the background, it shows that SWAT officers with riot shields are on the roof. We have just been informed that SWAT units are on the roof and planning on assisting the two heroes in case if. She was then stopped when a masked-wearing man jumps onto the roof from the skylighting. Okay, I believe that we have the assailant, and that he appears to be wearing a ski mask along with biker gloves with a red and black leather jacket, and that we were stopped when the SWAT started to charge at him. He begins to dodge them at great speeds along with great agility. Both my mom and Inko looks in shock. I was on the edge of my seat when he started to run to an edge of the building. Then a SWAT unit came in front of him. I noticed that his hand started glow red as he punches the shield with great force, which made the SWAT unit be pushed down on the ground. The news copter flies up a little more, but then the guy jumps off the building, and then nothing. The news reporter looks behind the cameraman and says, "Look." The cameraman looks behind him to show that the guy is actually shooting out rope and is using them and the lights to help him get across. The camera is aimed back at the news anchor who says, "Well, that's all for now. But there is one important question that is now baffled everyone's minds is, who is this Spider-Man? What will our heroes do to stop him?" Then my mom turns off the TV, leaving all of us in shock. Then Inko says, "That jacket, it looks like Hayashi's." We both look at her and my mom asks, "Huh?" Inko then says, "My husband, he used to wear that jacket, but he left it for my son." I then said, "Maybe Izuku is." Inko stopped me and said, "That's impossible. Back when me and my husband were young, those jackets were, as the kids say, all the rage." I looked at her and said, "No one never said that." My mom then says, "Well, in the meantime, Inko, why don't you help out? I must know what kind of food you and your son eat." Inko smiles and hands me her flip phone and says, "Kamala dear, can you call Izuku and ask him if he's safe? He left a note for me saying that he went out for a walk. Oh, and tell him that the dinner night was tonight." I blushed and said, Sure." My hands shook and I said to myself, "Okay, Kamala, you called a boy before. How is this any different?" With Izuku. Izuku was swinging around in the city. He then took a left, 10 more blocks to his apartment. He then lands on the roof as he gets a phone call. As he lands on the roof, he then puts his back to the building next door and pulls out his phone. Izuku POV. Oh no, Mom, she must have seen the news. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and lifted the ski mask halfway and answered it and said, "Hey Mom, I'm sorry if I'm late. I'm coming home right now." I was expecting my mom's voice from the other line, but then a familiar voice says, I'm not your mom." I recognized the voice and asked her, "Oh Kamala, why? Why do you have my mom's phone?" She then says, "Well, it turns out that my mom got the date for the dinner wrong, so your mom is at my place. And she told me to call you to see if you're okay and to, come home." I then said, "Sure, I'm coming home. I'm 3 blocks away. I'll see you there." I hung up the phone after Kamala said, "Okay, I'll see you there." I then returned to swinging around to home when out of nowhere my web line was cut by a red feather. I fell down on the roof of a building and looked up to the sky to see. "Oh my God, you're the number 33 hero, Hawks. I'm a huge fan." Hawks then says as he was still in the air, "I'm honored, but I need to take you in." I then said, "I didn't mean to do what I did. Come on, you're just ruffling my feathers." I put my hands over my mouth and realized what I said to him. Before he was about to say something, I then jumped off the roof and went swinging away from my apartment. Of course, Hawks gave chase to me. I eventually stopped and hid in a construction site. I heard Hawks' wings flapping, and then I took a peek to see that he left. I sighed in relief and headed back to my place. I then facepalmed myself and said, "Damn it, the dinner with Kamala." My hands were still shaking, and I thought to myself, "Oh my God, I just talked to a boy. No wait, I talked to Dante over the phone. How is this different?" Then Inko goes up to me and says, "My son is just the sweetest wisp of a person. I'm glad you met." I smiled and said, "Yeah, me too." Then the door opens. Me, Inko, and Mom look to see that it was my dad opening the door. Mom smiles and says, "Hello dear, how was your day?" My dad then says as he takes off his shoes, It was all right. Today it was a nightmare. We had just gotten word that some of our shipments weren't going to be in on time." My dad sees Inko and says, "Inko, welcome." He leans to my mom and asks while whispering, "Is it the dinner party already?" My mom shakes her head and says, No, no, no. It turns out we had the date wrong, so we're waiting until her son gets here." Dad then says, "Well then, thank you for coming over, Inko. And I hope that this son of yours is a delight." Mom then says, "Well, you should know that he made a good first impression on Kamala." I think that we'll be expecting some adorable grandkids very soon. I blush and shout, Mom. Then the doorbell rang. My dad then opened the door to see Izuku at the door smiling sheepishly. I got up from the couch and said to him, Izuku, I'm glad you made it on time. Izuku then says as he walks in and dogs Dad, well, I couldn't miss welcoming you guys to the neighborhood. He then sees his mom and goes up to his mom and says, I'm sorry that I didn't call Mom. I had a lot in my mind. His mom then says, it's okay, sweetie. I know you have a lot on your mind. I mean, after all, you are taking Kamala's family on a tour around Japan. He then blushes, then my dad says, oh, so you're planning on taking us out on a tour around the area, huh? He then looks at me and Zuku and says, well, I hope that there are some great sightseeing spots around here. He goes to Izuku as my mom and Inko go to the kitchen. He whisperly says to Izuku so no one wouldn't hear him. But I heard him say, look, I know that you and my daughter just met today. But remember, if I see any hanking-panking, I will go violent. So don't try anything on my daughter, okay? Izuku shakes his head yes, while I blushed slightly by what my dad told Izuku. We all sat at the table as my mom and Inko passed out the plates and started to serve the food. After they passed the food out and sat down, my mom then started the conversation by saying, oh, Kamala, did you told Izuku and Inko about your first sleepover? I blushed and groaned and said, Mom, why did you bring that up? Then Inko says as she was curious, what happened at your sleepover? My mom then continued and said, oh, when Kamala was little, she wanted her first sleepover, and we allowed her to. But then, a little after bedtime, she and her friends decided to watch a horror movie marathon. Then me and my husband wanted to check up on them, so we carefully snuck into her room. And wouldn't you know it, we scared them so bad that they started to cry. I blushed and slammed my head on the table as they laughed. Inko then says, believe it or not, Izuku was somewhat like that when he was a kid. I lift my head up to see that Izuku was covering his face. I smiled at Inko's story about how when Izuku was little, he and his mom watched superhero movies at night. One time on Halloween night, after watching a scary superhero movie, Inko scared Izuku in his little all-night costume and caused him to cry for most of the night. For most of dinner, it was my mom and dad and Inko reminiscing about when me and Izuku were babies. It got embarrassing when my mom brought out the baby pictures. But the main thing that was great was that I was able to get to know Izuku a little more, even though we just met. Time skip. It was time for them to go. We said our goodbyes and handed them some leftovers, as did they. I walked over to my room and was ready to sleep. But then I get a call from Tony in his Iron Man suit. I answered and said, Tony, hey. Not that I'm not happy to see you, but why are you calling me? He then says, well, kid, two things. 1. You're heading to hero school in Japan. And 2. Your team is coming over to join and to live there as well. I then ask, what? But why? Tony then says, well, here's the deal. Lately, some of the parents believed that their kids could be doing more good in hero schools like UA, rather than getting first-hand experience in the hero business. And they also believe that their education is more important. So when they go to UA, they will be focused on school more than being called into saving the world in the middle of class. You got all of that? I nodded. Then Tony finished off by saying, oh, one more thing. I saw the new Spider guy or some guy, Widow, Hawkeye, and Steve think a great way to kick off UA is by taking down that Spider guy, and trying to take him down could help in training. Do you think that your team and yourself is up for it? I nodded. Then Tony said, great. Your team is coming over in 3 months, so get a lot of things down before then. Then he hangs up. I then sink into my bed and look at the ceiling and say to myself, this is going to be a difficult 3 years, won't it? At the Midoriya's house, Deku was sitting in his chair and drawing some suit designs on a sheet of paper. He then says to himself, what will my hero name will be? He then looks at his spider bite and looks himself at the mirror. He then says, Spider-Man, I'll be the spectacular Spider-Man. He then begins to draw out his costume. He then picks up his phone to see that he received a small news alert that says, unknown villain loose in Japan. Where is he and what will he do now? Deku then says, what will I do? Simple, I'm going to get from villain to hero, maybe. Or I can go with a vigilante. Everyone knows my powers, so it'll be difficult to explain why they look so much like the soon-to-be Spider-Man. He then sees the time on his clock and says, oh, it's time for bed. I'll finish this tomorrow maybe. He then heads to bed and sleeps until tomorrow. Because tomorrow, he's going to meet face-to-face with Mrs. Marvel. Narrator deep voice. Next on My Spider Academia. Kamala is faced with telling her father that she has powers. Kamala. Dad, there's something I need to tell you that you're going to freak out about. Deku is forced to act fast and make Spider-Man appear early rather than planned. Spider-Man. Scumbags in ski masks. I'm here to make a good deposit, to kick your butts. Mrs. Marvel will get her first impression on Spider-Man before her team can ever come to Japan. Mrs. Marvel. Okay, so, I'm going to you to stand down. Mrs. Marvel says as her giant hand is pinning Spider-Man down. Spider-Man then says, stand down, I'm squashed like a bug. Huh, it's a spider's worst nightmare. Mrs. Marvel rolls her eyes. But our friendly neighborhood spider will meet an evil group of evil that will find his presence somewhat difficult in the unforeseen future. Unknown villain. Well, nice to meet you. It seems that you're a little outnumbered in terms of power. Compared to you, this league of villains can and will beat you in terms of power. Rhino, take him. For Kamala and Izuku, how will the two adjust to their lives, unknowing that the other lives a double life? Will the feelings that Kamala has for Izuku help determine if Spider-Man is a danger, or will they cloud her judgment for the future? And how will Izuku react to two of Kamala's teammates? Will one of them bring the green-eyed monster to life? Oh hey, nice to meet you, I'm Dante. I'm friends with Kamala. Or will the other help bring Kamala's feelings to light early? So Izuku, I heard that you're taking Kamala out on a tour around Japan. I was wondering, you won't mind if I tag along for the tour? I could show you around a few places I know. Find out in the next episode called The Animal of the Public. The Great Godzilla. Okay, so this isn't a chapter, but my first one at most. This reviewer is now my second favorite because he or she or they brought in questions along with information that I never knew about. So, I will be answering most of his questions as best I can. So let's get started. And the link to his profile is up top, and make sure to follow this person. The Great Godzilla Chapter 3. 9 ago. This story is definitely good and quite interesting for sure. However, I have to say like what the others said here. Why is Izuku, who is Spider-Man in this universe, is being chased by two pro-heroes for no good reason? Did he commit vigilantism yet? Also, you spelled Miss Marvel as Mrs. Marvel. The reason why he is chased by two heroes is because these two have different reasons. For Eraserhead, he wants an answer as to why Spider-Man was not effective to his quirk. Now, before he encountered Spider-Man, he was called in because the guard didn't know if the villain had some kind of quirk that in a form of a super strength kind. As for Endeavor, he has too much pride. When he got the call about a quirk user with a possible super strength, he saw it as an opportunity to boost his popularity. But since he escaped using more than one quirk, he wants to find him and show Spider-Man and the world who is really the strongest ever. And did he commit vigilantism? No, not really. The reason for being so is because he did escape the police and used his quirk. He is a villain for now. And also I thought Mr. Marvel was spelled out as Mrs. Marvel, you know, like you would call a teacher or a manager or a corporate leader. So thank you for telling. And since you decided to bring Dante Pertaz, aka Inferno, into the picture, will the rest of the team happen to be mainly inspired from Marvel Rising? Secret Warriors. You know, the team that has Squirrel Girl, Quake, Patriot, America Chavez, Ironheart, and Lockjaw. Yes, I will bring them into the fanfic, and I am planning on giving them an arc actually. Also, you do realize that Kamala Khan and the rest of her family are Muslims, right? While it is not mandatory for Izuku to convert to Islam, it is recommended. However, the children born from him and Kamala are definitely raised as Muslims. I knew her family was born from the Middle Eastern, and also I don't use the M word. To me, it sounds like a racist word, and when I tried to say it, I felt like some kind of creature was going to pop out of my stomach and eat my face. And I never knew that Izuku would need to convert to I word. Another word that I feel like poison for me because it sounds racist. And I never knew that if they have kids that they will become M word. By the way, will Toga also become part of the harem like Kamala and Ochako? I hope so because aside from shipping Izuku with Ochako, I also like to ship him with Toga as well. To be exact, I would not mind if he has these 3 women as his wives. No, I'm not planning on bringing Toga into his harem. I think that Kamala will just feel as if she is being the most targeted of all. So in your story, who are part of the Avengers? I can see Iron Man, Captain America, Captain Marvel, Black Widow, and Hawkeye. But where are Hulk, Thor, Ant-Man, Wasp, and Vision? And aside from the Avengers, do the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Masters of Mystic Arts of Camouflage exist? Well, the Guardians of the Galaxy will be required for sure since in this story, quirks most likely seem to have something the origins from the Terrigen mists created by the Kree Empire when they were experimenting on humans more than 10,000 years ago. Yes, the Avengers will be here. Hulk, Thor, Ant-Man, Wasp, and Vision will be here as well. But like Marvel's Spider-Man, they will meet him in episodes with team-ups with the 2, not anyone else. But Widow, Iron Man, Hawkeye, and Shield will keep an eye on both Izuku and Spider-Man. The reason why they will be watching the 2 without knowing that they're the same person is because Spider-Man is more creative and more agile than anyone else along with his strategic thinking. But with Izuku, the reason why they will keep an eye on him is because of his detailed hero analyst journals, because they think that those books will bring down any hero. As for the Guardians and the Mystic Arts, they will be there as well. And also quirks didn't come from the Terrigen mist that will still be for the Inhumans. And the same thing with quirks, because quirks came from genetic mutation while Inhumans were created. And if that's the case, then that means Attilan may still exist along with the Inhuman royal family. After all, the Inhuman royal family existed for more than thousands of years without aging. So to live a few more centuries into the world, where their population is now widespread around the globe, would not make them aged much. Speaking of which, does the word Inhumans are still being used to describe the people with quirks in your story? Or is the word considered to be pejorative by the time when quirks were beginning to become the norm? The word Inhuman is used to describe someone without a quirk, because it was natural for people to get powers while others didn't, and to some, that was inhuman. Inhuman is used as pejorative as a slur for quirk users to call the quirkless. And no, it will not be pejorative for the time when quirks were becoming a thing. As for the royal family, they will still be the royal family. Do you plan to have more villains from Marvel appear as well? I can see those who are members of the Sinister Six are actually being part, or at the very least, allies of the League of Villains here. But it seemed to be the former from what I saw in the preview of the next chapter. And while the Sinister Six are incorporated into the League of Villains, those like Exile and Sheath may become part of the Meta Liberation Army here. Heck, you can even also go to have the army is actually either in service of the Kree Empire or of Maximus the Mad. I can see someone like Maximus being the inspiration for Destro and his son in this universe. After all, Maximus wanted the world to be solely ruled by the Inhumans. But if you decided to have the Redestro and his army serve the Kree Empire instead, I can see that someone like Hala, the Accuser, is being sent by the Supreme Intelligence to form a pact and assist them in their quest to take over the Earth on behalf of the Kree Empire in exchange of allowing the Earth to become an autonomous province within the Kree Empire. Yes, I am planning on having some villains from Marvel appear as well. Also, there will be some members of the Sinister Six who will be a part of the LOV, but there will be others that are rogue. Then the ones of the LOV will become a rogue and be a part of the Sinister Six. Also, no Exile and Sheath will not be part of the Meta Liberation Army. One more thing, I believe that during the early days when quirks were beginning to appear more and more, the government responded by creating an army of killer robots called the Slayers to deal with them. The Slayers, of course, are actually the adaptations of the Spider Slayers from Spider-Man. So by taking out the word spider and putting them into the roles similar to the Sentinels from the X-Men, they will be the ready-to-go killer robots for the Inhumans when quirks were becoming the norm. The reason I told you this is because the Sentinels originated from the X-Men. So it will make no sense if something from the X-Men will appear out of the blue. And no, the appearance and reference of Slayers won't be in here. P.S. I think the powerful alien civilizations that would be good for this universe would be the Chitauri, the Clintor, the Kree Empire, and the Rigelian Empire. As for the Nova Corps, I really don't know if it should have a domain of its own or not. PSS. Are you planning to adapt some story arcs from Spider-Man into this story? If so, I would love to see some arcs like Alien Costume Saga. If this be my destiny, and Maximum Carnage, I just might. I think I will do Spider Island, G-Nation, The Raft, and possibly the final showdown with Norman, the animal of the public. I just saw the latest review, and I'm glad that you guys like the whole G-Nation and Spider Island. And also there was a question about Gwen's role. So I think I will have Gwen to be the first person to have Venom, and her new name will be Punish Spider or Blood Spider. The Punish Spider was inspired by the What If. Peter Parker became the Punisher, but as Spider, which means that he kills his enemies. But Gwen won't be doing that. She will actually go after the gangs and the mobs, but she won't kill. I'll have an origin issue for some of the Marvel characters in the MHA universe, because, for some of them, they were powerless and their lives were different. But since they live in MHA, their origins will be different, but their personalities will still be the same as they were in the show. And I will have the Osborns show up in the next issue. Then there's the final showdown. I think that I will use what Norman said to Parker with the whole ID thing. But Harry might be a hero, maybe. As for the question about Black Cat, I think that she will be in here like a small scene in this chapter. Along with Doc Ock, he will also have a small scene in here. But as Deku's science teacher, he will be talking about prosthetics and about quirk genes along with the whole possibilities on the enhanced theory. You know, where someone gains powers through accidents. And also that theory is actually my theory, if this was possible, so when you get to that point just tell what you think about it. Also yes, Spider-Man's original team will be here along with most of the characters from that show. Spider-Man's original team will show up in 5 chapters from now called Shilding the Namu Man's Land. Let's get started. 4 weeks later. Oh crap, I'm going to be late, Deku said as he swung through the city of Mutsufu in an attempt to reach his school on time. Deku is currently wearing his school uniform with his newly handmade mask. His mask was entirely red, with a sharp white lens surrounded with a black outline keeping the lens on the mask. Deku then sees the train coming in. He then aims his hand out and shoots a web line to the roof of the train. The train starts to pull him in. Izuku then shoots another line out, but aims it at a corner. He then lets go of his previous web line and swings to the side of the building. He then sees his school. Deku lets go of his web and lands on the roof. He then takes off his mask and shoves it in his backpack and runs inside through the flight of stairs. He then reaches his hand on the door and slides the door open. He then walks into the classroom and says, "I made it." Then the teacher says in a professor tone, "Midoriya, look at his watch, you are 3 minutes early." In the United States. Midoriya groans as the class laughs at him. He then takes out a sheet of paper and says as he hands the paper to his teacher, "Here you go, Mr. Octavius. My thesis statement on quantum entanglement. I got that from Agents of SHIELD. May it rest in peace." Mr. Octavius looks it over and says, "Very good, very good. This is why you are my star student. Now, take your seat. We'll begin in a moment." Everyone begins to glare at Deku as he walks to his seat. Deku POV. It's been 4 weeks since the new teacher and 4 weeks since there hasn't been any word on the spider villain at all. Mr. Octavius came to school. The last few weeks he threw every single one of his classes and students a 3-page test. Each one was more different and difficult than the other. They all talked about medical science, chemistry, biology, biochemistry, biotechnology. And even the weirdest of all is that he wanted us to do his latest assignment. He wanted us to work on a thesis on some kind of science theory. What's worst of all is that the entire class hates me because he gives out 1 A+ in each one of his classes. And in this class, the morning class, I have the A+, which means everyone else has either a C or a B. I then sit on my seat and look up to see that Mr. O is writing on the chalkboard. He then says, "Okay, class, today we will be talking about biotechnology. Now then, who here knows what it is?" Then everyone raised their hands. Mr. O then said, "Yes, Bakugo." Then Kachin says, "It's where some dumb tech mixes with some gross stuff in the human's body." Then a girl I never met adds in, "Hey, maybe we can have Deku help with the biotech, because he's..." She stopped when Mr. O slammed his hand on her desk and said, "Now then, we're on the 5th day of the 4th week, and already you disrupted my class. Now then, as punishment for the entire class, you will all be writing a 2-page essay about everything about biotech." Everyone groans. Then Mr. O adds in, "And I want it all done by tomorrow." Then the bell rings. Christ almighty, time passes by. Everyone starts to get up from their seats. Then Mr. O says while pointing at me, "Mr. Midoriya, a word, now." I walk up to him as he sits on his chair and moves closer to his desk. He then pulls out my test from yesterday and says as he smiles, "Another A+, brilliant work. You gained 4 A's in a row since I started working here. But that isn't why I called you up, because of one thing." Then everyone leaves. He then pulls out a pamphlet. The Osborne Academy for the Great Minds has an open spot. One of their examinees couldn't make it, so they have an audition next week. Deku picks up the pamphlet. The theme of the audition is a science fair, and the choice of each project must be related to biotechnology, either through theory or an actual tech that you think has multiple uses than just one. I smiled and scratched the back of my head and said, "Wow, Mr. Octavius, this is amazing. Do you really think I can?" He smiles and says, "Yes, I do. Midoriya, you belong with those who have the same mindset as you do. And also I think those hero notebooks will help prove that you belong in that school." I then asked, "Wait, you know about those? But wait a minute, isn't this expensive?" Mr. O then says, "That is for those who didn't take the audition. The entire academy is free of charge, and it's in the center of Japan, so you wouldn't leave your home. But you do need to transfer your papers and all of your records to them, along with medical history in case anything happens." He then stands up from his desk and reaches out his hand and says, "Welcome, Midoriya, to the world of science." I then smile and shake his hand. Time skip outside of school. Kamala was seen walking up to the entrance of the school while looking at her phone and reading a news alert that said, "Who is he? What does he want? Where does he come from? Are you safe?" Written by J. Jonah Jameson. Kamala then scrolls down to see a video of Spider-Man swinging away from Hawks as he gives chase. Kamala then looks up to see Deku walking to the entrance. She then looks at him a little and thinks to herself, "Wait, has Izuku been working out?" Deku then sees her wearing a single-strap backpack. He then says, "Kamala, hey, how are you doing today?" Kamala puts away her phone and says, "Okay, I guess. That's somewhat the perks of being homeschooled." Deku laughed and said, "Well, that's fair. I'm sorry that I haven't taken you guys out on a tour yet. I've swamped with school." Kamala then gestures her hands and says, "It's okay. I'll be waiting." In the corner of her eye, she sees a notebook that says Hero Analyst 13. She carefully grabs his notebook and quietly places it in her single strap backpack. As they came up the corner, 7 police cars crossed the street with high speeds to the west. Kamala and Deku had determined faces and said to the other at the same time, "I'll be back." They then ran into separate alleyways. Deku changed into his costume faster considering he used his high school pants and had to remove his high school jacket and take out his dad's jacket with a removable spider logo on the front. He then took out his mask and shot a web on the top corner of a building so his backpack would stay. This is the Spider-Man Last Stand suit, but without the other spider on the back. He then takes a big jump and shoots a line over to the next building across the street and starts to swing to the side with the police. Deku then thinks to himself, "Wait a minute. I know this route. We're 5 blocks away from heading to the bank. It'll take an hour to get there. But I know a shortcut." Deku swings to the right and goes a straight shot. He then takes a huge jump and starts swinging again. Time skip. Deku then breaks through the glass window and lands on the ground. Superhero landing. Deku looks around to see 5 guys with guns wearing ski masks and all black clothes and a white fluffy scarf around their necks. Deku then says in a mocking voice, "Scumbags in ski masks. I'm here to make a good deposit, to kick your butts." One of the guys shouted as the banker inside looked up. "It's that spider freak. He's here to take our credit. Get him." Deku then jumps up onto the wall and runs across the ceiling and says, 1. I'm not here to take your credit. Mutsufu is under protection. 2. I'm not a bad guy. I like long walks and love to bust some babies. 3. The name's Spider-Man. Spider-Man then proceeds into fighting the criminals. He either threw them into the wall and shot a web net, or even wrapped them in a web cocoon. After he was done, he then jumped onto the roof, and as everyone got up on their feet slowly, he then said, "Now then, let this be the day that Spider-Man has declared that all of Mutsufu is under his protection." Yah-ho-huo. Spider-Man then jumps off of the roof of the bank and swings away. While he swings off, he then turns his head to see a black van with lazuli flowers in bold white letters. He then goes on the roof of a building and tries to listen. He then hears a scratchy voice that says, "Okay, let's go over the plan one more time. You'll be stationed at the east side of the UA. You'll cause a distraction so that the heroes will pay attention to you while we take some important files." Spider-Man was about to jump in when suddenly his spider sense made him look behind him. Then a giant hand grabs him and throws him on the ground and pins him down. Deku then hears tires screeching and says, "Oh, come on." He looks up to see Miss Marvel, an Avenger, standing over him and pinning him down with her large hand. "Mrs. May," Marvel then says, "Okay, so I'm going to need you to stand down." Spider-Man struggles to get loose. Spider-Man then says, "Stand down? I'm squashed like a bug." "Huh? It's a spider's worst nightmare." Mrs. Marvel rolls her eyes. Deku then asks Miss Marvel, "Hey, you're Miss Marvel. You're an Avenger. What are you doing here?" "I knew my rugged good looks would impress some girls overseas." Miss Marvel then says, "I'm here too." She was then cut off by Spider-Man as his hand glowed red. "Sorry, but I'm in a hurry here. I have a van to catch." He then grabs her large fingers and pushes them off of him. Miss Marvel stumbles back, but Spider-Man shoots a web on her and makes a cocoon around her. He then says, "Sorry, but not sorry." Spider-Man then jumps off of the building, leaving Miss Marvel alone. She then makes a call through voice activation and says, "Tony, can you have my team come in early? I'm going to need them sooner rather than later." Time skip. Spider-Man then sees the van parked in an alleyway at the east side of UA. He then lands in the alleyway and says, "Well, well, Goose. Looks like I'm going to take you jokers to school." Then a figure wearing black shirt and pants with a pale hand covering his face then steps forward and says with a scratchy voice from earlier, "Who in the hell are you supposed to be? Wait, I know you. You're that spider villain that escaped Endeavor and Eraserhead." Spider-Man nods his head and says, "First of all, the name's Spider-Man, and second, you were planning this heist in my neighborhood. Mutsufu is under my protection. Anyone does anything in my town, they mess with me. Well, nice to meet you. It seems that you're a little outnumbered in terms of power. Compared to you, this league of villains can and will beat you in terms of power." Rhino takes him. Spider-Man then says to them mockingly, "Oh really? I'm sure that I can handle this Rhino guy. I mean, he must be a little over Y." He was cut off by a large man who tackled him onto the large public street. The man was a dark gray-colored man with a horn on his nose. The man throws Spider-Man into a car. Spider-Man gets up and looks at the man and asks, "So, you're Rhino, huh?" Rhino stops his foot into the ground while the people around were taking video on their phones. "I thought you'd be. I don't want to say jumps on top of the car, want to say ugly right now, but..." Rhino scuffs and says, well, look at Mr. Funny Bug. Or should I say Mr. Squashed Bug." Rhino charges at Spider-Man. Spider-Man then jumps over Rhino as Rhino crashes into the car and tears it apart. Spider-Man then mockingly says, "So Rhino, how do you lose weight?" "No weight. You lost weight, but it looks like you found it again." Rhino growls and shouts, "I'm going to squash you," and charges at Spider-Man, who shoots webs at his feet enough to make it look as if he's in mid-stage of being in a cocoon. Then out of nowhere, a giant hand slaps the back of Rhino's head, which forces his entire body to fall down while his feet are still webbed to the ground. Spider-Man then looks up to see Miss Marvel and says, "Lady, you are hell with that giant hand of yours. And your timing is just mind-blown, Miss." Marvel then says as she jumps next to Spider-Man, "Same with you. Now what's the deal with this guy?" Spider-Man then says, "Well, this guy is a part of a group who are trying to break into the UA, get some files on the next splash of New Year students. And this guy was supposed to be the distraction to get the heroes out here to get them away from the school." Rhino then says as he looks at Spider-Man, "I'll tear you apart, Bug." Miss Marvel nodded and said, "So we split up. I'll handle his friends while you deal with the big and ugly here." Spider-Man nodded and said, "Wait, give me a kiss for good luck." Miss Marvel rolled her eyes and left Spider-Man to deal with Rhino. Spider-Man then says to Rhino as he tears apart the webs on his feet, "You know, rhinos are known to have extreme anger issues. I guess that is what is happening with you since you're on your metrocycle." Rhino then picks up the car and rips it into two ripped halves and shouts, "I'll show you who's on their metrocycle." Rhino, without hesitation, throws the ripped car at Spider-Man. He jumps in the air to dodge. But the Rhino's inheritance was useless. Spider-Man uses a web line, and with his enhanced strength, brings the ripped car parts down onto Rhino, who was pushed by the momentum of the force. After both cars crashed into him, Spider-Man then swung under his chin and delivered an uppercut using his red glowing hands. Rhino stumbles backwards 10 feet back. He places his right hand on his head. Then a familiar voice comes from behind and shouts, "Looks like you need a hand." Then a giant sucker punches Rhino across the face, pushing him to a building wall head first. Rhino falls down to the ground while Spider-Man glances to see Miss Marvel standing behind him on his right side, just a few steps away. Spider-Man then says to her, "So, I guess you and I make a great team, huh?" Miss Marvel then says, "No way, you and I will make a great team. And besides, I'm here to arrest you." Spider-Man then says, "Oh yeah, I completely forgot that. Hey, wait a minute. How did you handle the hand man?" Miss Marvel then answers, "Ugh, don't remind me." That weirdo and his Houdini friend kept on making me hit myself. But I was able to stop them from taking next year's students. Now back to why I am here. Spiderman, okay. I have no idea what your name is. I place you under arrest for vigilantism and unlawful use of your quirk, and before she could finish, Spiderman had already started swinging away and was 10 blocks from the scene, leaving Miss Marvel with herself. She then shouts out of frustration, "Sure, just go ahead and leave me to clean up the mess and give the police a report." Takes in a deep breath, clutches and waves her fist in the air, asshole. Marvel turns around to see that both police and heroes were running to the scene. Then, her phone chimes to reveal a text message from Izuku which says, "Hey Kamala, I'm sorry that I ran out early from our walk. If you want, I can take you out on that tour I promised. You can contact your parents, and it would be a real tour." Marvel blushed for a second and typed, "Sure, I'll meet you there in an hour from now." Time skipped to 5:50 p.m. As Marvel POV. There I am sitting on a bench waiting for Izuku. Maybe I'm too early. That whole statement to the cops and heroes took too long to get back home, or maybe it was too early for the statement. I began looking up at the sky. When is Izuku going to be here? I asked myself. When suddenly a familiar short red-haired girl stood over me and said, "Double. I gasped and got up and faced her and said, "Doreen, it's so good to see you." We both hugged each other. Doreen then said, "Likewise, anywho, everyone is here as well." Doreen motioned her hands towards their friends, which gave Kamala a great big smile. Stood before her were her teammates, the Secret Warriors. She goes up to her friends, America Chavez, Dante Pertuz, Gwen Stacy, Daisy Johnson, Rayshawn Sean Lucas, and Riri Williams. She then says, "Guys, I'm so happy to see you all." Daisy then says as Kamala's hug loosens, "Yeah, I mean we didn't mind at all that we had to leave home. Oh, I don't know, a few months early." Kamala lets them out of the hug and scratches the back of her head and says, "Sorry about that. Listen, I really need your help in taking down Spider-Man. He's proven to be a little more difficult as expected." America then says, "Oh, come on, Chica. He shouldn't be that much of a problem." They all nodded as Gwen says, "Sure, no problem. I do want to go after the guy who decided to steal my stick." Rayshawn then adds, "You didn't start swinging on rooftops, and if I remember correctly, you didn't have a spider on you. That started at least 1 hour after the news made you." Gwen scuffs and says back, "Okay, fine. But he did take half of my moves." Gwen then adds, "And why did you call him Spider-Man anyway?" Kamala answers, "Because that is his name. I didn't pick, but anyway." Dante then looks at Kamala and says, "So, you want to take us out on a tour?" Kamala then says, "Well, I'm actually meeting someone to take me on a small tour around the city. Trust me, this guy is nice and sweet," and she was then cut off by Izuku Midoriya's voice. "Kamla, I'm over here." Kamala turns to their right to see Izuku running towards them. Izuku stops to take a breath as Kamala and her friends catch up to him to see that Izuku is wearing a green sweat t-shirt and a black shorts. Kamala blushes slightly and goes up to Deku and says, "Hey, you're a little late." Deku then says back, "Yeah, sorry about that. I had to head back home and change." See Kamala's friends. "Oh, I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself." Pulls up his hand, "I'm Izuku Midoriya. And you are?" Kamala's friends introduced themselves to Izuku, as Dante was the last one who said, "Oh hey, nice to meet you, I'm Dante. I'm friends with Kamala." Izuku shook his hand and said, "Oh, nice to meet you all. Welcome to Mutsufu. I'm glad that I got to meet more of Kamala's friends," he says as he smiles greatly, causing everyone's heart to spike from cuteness. America goes up to him and puts her hand over his shoulder and says to him, "So Izuku, I heard that you're taking Kamala out on a tour around Japan. I was wondering, you won't mind if I tag along for the tour? I could show you around a few places I know." Izuku blushes as Kamala stares at her friend America with anger. Gwen then perks up and says, "Okay, So Izuku, can I call you Izzy? Have you seen Spider-Man or whatever? And do you think he's impressive? Izuku then answers while scratching the back of his head. Oh. Daisy then says to Gwen, come on Gwen, you can't expect him to answer about someone who hasn't been seen in a while. Besides, let's take a tour on the road. Time skip. Kamala POV. Izuku took us around Mutsufu, and I have to say, it was great. I mean, even though they were heroes that had different ways of patrolling than the Avengers, it was still great to see that no matter where you go, you can always find something that relates to home. We stopped by a TV store and watched the news about Spider-Man and Welmy fighting against the Rhino. We ended the night with Izuku going back upstairs to his house and called it a night while me and my team stayed outside to talk. Dante started off the conversation. Okay, so, what do we know about Spider-Man? Kamala, you were there when he fought Rhino. Anything you can give us? Rayshawn nods his head in agreement. I then said, his name certainly lives up to his powers. But when I first captured him before he went after the group with the Rhino, he turned around like he knew I was there. Gwen then adds in, maybe he has the same thing I have. Whenever there is some form of danger behind me that I don't know, the symbiote basically warns me. Maybe he has a symbiote too? And perhaps this one gave him spider-like powers. Doreen then adds in, maybe or maybe not. Spiders are known to have a sixth sense. This sense usually alerts them when their hair starts to go straight like. Maybe that is what we're dealing with. Daisy then recaps, okay, so our theory is that he has a symbiote, or maybe it's his powers. Rayshawn then says, either way, we can't get close to him if his powers or symbiote warns him. America was just about to say something when Kamala said, there's something else too. Back in the fight, I saw something weird happening with his fist. It was glowing red for some reason. Maybe he has two quirks, or it's just one quirk and a symbiote is helping him. Rarai then says, either way, we're screwed. Let's call it a day. I'll see you guys in the morning for training. We all nodded, and we went back to our places. I walk into my house and see my dad sitting on the couch looking at the newspaper, but turns his attention to me. He then asks me, oh, Kamala, what are you still doing out? I then said to him, because I need to tell you something. He then puts down his newspaper and turns to me as I start off. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. You're going to freak out about. The end of this episode was brought to you by Marvel. On the next new episode of My Spider Academia, Spider-Man thought that it would have been a little tough to get chased down by an Avenger. But how will he feel about being taken down by a group of young heroes from S.H.I.E.L.D.? Nova. Okay, Webhead, you're coming with us. White Tiger. We can do this the easy way, or the hard way. Will he be captured by them? Power Man. How you got nowhere else to run Bug? Or will he gain their respect? I don't understand. No one has ever been able to withstand my fists. I am in your debt. Please, Man of Spiders, allow me to become your student. But S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't the only ones after him. I am Kraven the Hunter. There hasn't been a prey that has never escaped me. Ha ha ha. Well, looks like the news weren't exaggerating about yours' strength. The name's Cat. Black Cat, and trust me, Spider. I'm the only one in this city you shouldn't cross. Will Spider-Man make enemies? Or will he gain new friends? And what sinister foes are waiting for him in shielding the Namu Man's land? Find out next week in My Spider Academia. Stay tuned for more. Shielding the Namu Man's land. The Great Godzilla Chapter 5. Jun 7. So are you going to add Power Man, Nova, Iron Fist, and White Tiger in as well? I'm glad to see them again in your story. It's been a while since I watched Ultimate Spider-Man. You saw the Ultimate Spider-Man too. I loved that show. When 2017 Spider-Man, I thought that it would be like a reboot of the show, but with better animation and graphics, because every guy in there looked like a football player. And personally, I think you should go with either making Quirk a nickname for the Terrigen Mist, or something like the word Quirk being the name of powers granted by the Terrigen Mist. That way, it will make both elements of MHA and Marvel feel connected and appear to be truly fused. The reason I kept going for this in your story is because there has never been references of the X-Men for like at once in your story. So yeah, that means Quirk is not the nickname of X-Gene at the moment until you decided to go for it instead. So there will be the Terrigen Mist. But when it happens, I will make it that there are only a handful of people who will become inhuman. The Kree only experimented on let's say 8% of the humans on Earth. And since the Inhumans fought back, and no one knew who their ancestors were, this percent is mainly found in the 20% of the quirkless population. And then the mist came in and very few quirkless people showed off their powers. Does that clarify anything? As for the X gene, I will mention it in later chapters and have Prof. X meet Deku and keep his secret. And as to why 20% of the population is quirkless, and as to why there aren't that many mutants. Also, will the secret warriors also attend UA like Kamala? If that happened, I wonder how the USJ incident will be played out in your story, because having them being there along with Nova, Power Man, Iron Fist and White Tiger can definitely make things a lot more interesting. The USJ will play out really differently because Deku will wait for this. We'll get the job at the Daily Bugle and we'll go with both Class 1A and 2B, and what Jameson says is that UA isn't the school as we thought it was. Because of this, Deku will have no problem getting to the USJ. By the way, have you heard of the game called My Hero Academia? The Strongest Hero? No, I did not have, my friend. One more thing. What are your plans for the Shy Hasakai, Gigantomachia, and Lady Nagant? Speaking of Lady Nagant, why should SHIELD existed anymore if the Public Hero Safety Commission already existed? I can see SHIELD existed in the past, but it may most likely suffered from the same fate like the one in the MQ. You know, being infiltrated and compromised from inside out by Hydra. Gigantomachia and Lady Nagant will appear in this chapter, and Shy Hasakai arc will be different. The reason why SHIELD is around is because someone has to Nick Fury reference keep both eyes open. Hydra will also be here, but in different ways and alongside AIM, who will be having a part-time agenda into taking down Spider-Man so they could experiment him or just want revenge. P.S. Do Atlantis and Wakanda exist in this universe? I hope that's the case because I would love to see a chapter related to the peace talks between Atlantis and Wakanda bringing a formal end to the war between their nations. Well, it's either that, or you can do the usual idea of some vibranium being stolen from Wakanda, and the Black Panther decided to come himself to retrieve the stolen objects. Yes, they do, my friend. Also, when they begin to fight, the Avengers will bring Spider-Man along to fight with the team, and the Secret Warriors as well, or Spider-Man, will be passing by and helps out. Also, yes, the Black Panther is king, and he will basically call upon Deku for help capturing a Wakanda villain that fled to Japan. Wakanda forever. BTW, the next issue will be about Osborn Academy for the Great Minds, which will reveal 2 Spider-Man's villains, and Doc Octopus will be made. Also will appear alongside the villains will be AIM, and Hydra, and the League of Villains. Also 2 Avengers will appear as well besides Miss Marvel. And also Harry and Norman will be introduced in this chapter, and Norman will be a member of the Court of Shadow who is running to get this Hydra. 2 weeks later. Spider-Man. No real name, nor has there been any DNA telling us who he is. We searched through data records and through doctor visits for his quirk, which would tell us what his name is, but nothing. There are people who have registered with his powers, but there are only people who have one of his powers, but not all at once. We also checked to see if there was anyone with that jacket. Nothing. Said one of the most dangerous men on the planet. All might be strong, but he's number 2 compared to Nick Fury, director of SHIELD, Global Security Defense of the Earth itself. It may be true that there are heroes out in the world, that we don't need a SHIELD, right? Wrong. You see, even though there are heroes out there in the world, there are still greater threats that not even All Might can handle. SHIELD was created to handle the more important threats like All for One. Demigods magic mainly because they can pack a serious punch. I mean, can you imagine All Might fighting a magic user? When SHIELD handles one of the three above, they usually make some stuff up. But what SHIELD also does is to protect the world from criminals like AIM, or the most recently and secretly discovered Hydra. Fury stood in front of the meeting room of the SHIELD helicarrier who stand in front of SHIELD's newest heroes Iron Fist, Power Man, White Tiger, and Nova. Fury shows them photos, videos of Spider-Man when he first arrived on the scene, and when he resurfaced after 4 weeks. The videos and photos of Spider-Man showed him saving civilian lives from wreckage fire accidents, stopping villains, and running from the pro-heroes all in just the 2 months after he resurfaced. One of the young heroes called White Tiger Ake Ava Iola speaks out after Fury's info. Director Fury: Sir, I don't understand, why do we need to go in? Didn't the Avengers assign Ms. Marvel to capture Spider-Man? Fury nodded yes and says back, that is true, but snaps his fingers to show images of the Secret Warriors fighting Spider-Man. As you can see, as Marvel and the Secret Warriors haven't been able to apprehend him in the 2 months that he has been resurfaced. Power Man aka Luke Cage then says, Sir, with all due respect, why are we helping Japan to take down Spider-Man? I thought that they didn't want the weird and sanctioned hero agency, even though SHIELD isn't even a hero agency. Fury then nods his head and says back, because Japan feels as if their heroes aren't making too much progress into his capture. Power Man then adds, so in basic terms, they don't want their heroes to look bad, and they just want someone else to clean up their mess and take the credit. Earning another multiple Nick Fury nods again. Then Nova aka Sam Alexander then says back, why are we helping them anyway? They just want Spider-Man taken down because he got away from Endeavor and Eraserhead, who just wants him to find out why he couldn't erase his quirk for Endeavor. He just wants to take him down to be a little bit more famous. A matter of fact, we should just Japan deal with their own problems, if they thought that their heroes could handle him in the first place. Then the wise of the young heroes Iron Fist aka Danny Rand speaks up. We must help them no matter what the circumstances are. But I am puzzled why we should capture him. Perhaps he is following the words of Nelson Mandela, who once said when a man-woman is denied the right to live the life Hesh wishes, they have no choice but to become an outlaw. He is clearly helping people who are in need. Why should we stop someone who wishes to save others in his own way? White Tiger then says back, because Japan doesn't have the spine to handle a potential vigilante maker. They're worried that if this guy starts to use his quirk, then others will follow so they could put the law in their own hands. Fury then says back, it doesn't matter. Right now all that matters is the mission. We have a location to capture Spider-Man just in case if some hero decides to take the credit and claim that it was him. Now then, as the words of one of the heroes of Japan would say, let us capture this evildoer. Who knows what sinister game that he concocting as we speak. In Japan, Izuku Midoriya could say a lot of things right now that could probably make his mom to go into a coma because she would just be reliving the day that her son, her only baby boy, was swearing like a madman in his head as he began chasing the school bus after both waking up before his alarm clock went off. And afterwards he began working on the blueprints for his science project for Osborne Academy, while he planned on swinging to his school and landing on the school's rooftop like he's done before, where he would be at least 5 minutes late for class. But this was before the Secret Warriors came. But today was a lot more different. He ran into is an understatement. It's more like Patriot used his glider shield to slam Spider-Man into the outside walls of a building and dragged him across. But luckily he was able to lose him by going under a bridge and jumped up onto the ceiling bottom of the bridge. Midoriya had to wait under the bridge for at least 10 minutes until Patriot decided to lose pursuit. By now in Deku's mind, he is currently saying to himself, God damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it. I can't believe it. I'm going to be late to class. Spider-Man Last Stand from the comics. And from Spider-Man PS4. Deku is currently wearing his Spider-Man jacket. But he's added a few new things to his uniform since the 2 weeks that he was active. He had to wear a pair of finger gloves that were red on top and black at the bottom. He also began putting a little red duct tape on his school-issued. The tape in a circuit computer-like pattern, but only on his left leg. He's also decided to buy a pair of red shoes where he painted over a few parts of it with black paint. After getting down from the bridge and deciding not to swing around in hopes of not running into Patriot again, he removed his jacket, mask, gloves, boots, and tape off of him and placed them in his backpack. Deku decided to try to run to his school. As he makes a left turn to the next block, he then sees the public bus and was about to run to it when it started to leave. Can this day get any worse? Then it became a lot worse when it started to rain down cats and dogs. Deku begins to walk in defeat as he begins to head to his school. He was coming up on a right turn, which was known to be a hot spot for traffic jams, when suddenly a black limo with black tinted window starts to pull up next to Deku and stops next to him, which then makes him feel cautious. The car's window opens up to a young man around Deku's age with short curly red hair with green eyes. The kid is currently wearing a sweater vest with a turtleneck with a diamond-like pattern on the cedar. And I'm using Spectacular Spider-Man Harry and Norman Osborn. The kid asks Deku with a nice tone of voice. Hey, you need a ride or something? No one should be out in this rain. Deku thinks for a moment and says with an innocent smile. Sure. The kid opens the car. Deku goes in thanks by the way. The kid then says as he closes the door, which then causes the driver to continue to drive. Sure, no problem. As Deku steps into the limo, he sees a middle-aged man with broad-like shoulders with the same hairstyle and color as the kid who opened the door. Deku sits down next to the red-headed boy and presents himself to the passengers while holding out his hand. Sorry, I forgot to present myself. I'm Izuku Midoriya. I go to Alador Junior High. And you? The red-haired kid smiles and shakes Deku's hand and says, Harry, it's Harry Osborn. Deku gasps as he and Harry are done shaking hands. No way, as in the Harry Osborn, son of Norman Osborn, founder of Oscorp Industries, which is the number sect of the Hero Support Company and military contracts, also principal of Osborn Academy. That Norman and Harry Osborn? Harry nods his head and says to Deku, the one and only. Gestures to his dad, that's my dad. Deku gasps as he stares at Norman Osborn and says to him, so cool. It's and bows to him while sitting on her, sir. Norman then says to Deku, please, don't bow. Some say that it's a sign of weakness. Harry then says to his dad, Dad. Deku then says, it's okay, Osborn. My mom always said that sometimes in life you need to give all people the respect that they deserve. And my dad always said, if you work hard you'll die hard, Roadhouse. Harry was about to make the last quote that he said that his father said to him. But Norman Osborn began laughing with a deep voice and began to cry slightly from the laughter, which confused Harry. Norman then says as he wipes away a tear, ha 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 ha, that's one way to look at it. Harry then whispers to Deku, I never once saw him laugh like that. He was then cut off by the limo making a hard stop. Norman then pulls out his phone and says through the phone, drive, what's going on? Why did you stop? The driver then answers through the phone, I'm sorry sir, there appears to be a sudden construction site in the way. Norman then says to himself as he cuts off the call, a construction site in the middle of the highway? Who in their right mind would be doing construction at this time? Deku then hears them and leans over to Harry and says to him, when I signal you, your dad, the driver and me, we will make a run for it. Harry then asks him, why? It's just a construction site, isn't it? Deku shakes his head no and answers back, No, every day in my neighborhood we get a local mail update that tells up which hero will be patrolling the area or which criminal we should watch out for and what day area should there be construction. We got out this week, and it didn't say anything about construction on the highway. Harry's eyes widened in fear. Then out of nowhere a knock was heard from the roof of the limo from outside. Everyone becomes quiet until four separate slash marks cut through the steel. Then the shredded area was ripped off to reveal a woman at average height of both Deku and Harry. The woman in question has short white hair with green eyes and fair skin. The woman is wearing a somewhat tight black combat-like jumpsuit that shows off her hips, with a black short-sleeved jacket where there is a white scarf around the neck area with two yellow eyes with large slits in the middle around the shoulder, with black combat gloves, with black combat boots with white straps and white fur around the entrance. The woman has a domino-like mask with white lenses on the eyes. And this is Black Cat from Spider-Man 2017. The woman then says in a seductive-like voice, yet young at the same time, "Sorry, boys, but this meeting is one for adults, so scram." Norman wasted no time in opening the right door and said to his son and Deku, "Go, get help." Turns to the woman, "Don't you dare hurt my son." Just then, Harry and Deku begin to run off to the right into an alleyway where Deku begins to split off from Harry, where he found himself in the arms of the pro-heroes. MT, Lady, Camry Woods and Death Arms. While Deku was changing in his Spider-Man suit. Back with Norman. He was currently dealing with the woman who seemed to have the intention of killing him. She then goes into the limo, which then causes Norman to say to her, "Look, I don't know what you want or who or why. If it's money that you want, I can double the amount of whoever is paying you. Just please, don't hurt my son." The woman then says, "Oh, don't worry. I'm not here for you or your money. I just have some way to draw him out." Then a thud was heard on the roof, which then caused the two to look up to see Spider-Man with his arms crossed over his chest, which then gave the woman a smile over her face. Spider-Man then says to the woman, "I don't think that you noticed, but you're causing some major traffic violations." The woman then jumps out of the inside of the limo and tackles Spider-Man off the roof and tumbles off the limo. Spider-Man then lands on his feet. But when the woman landed, she began doing 3 backflips away from Spider-Man. Spidey hears the limo door opening slightly to see Norman. Spidey then tells him, "Go, run, find your son." Norman nods his head and runs off to find his son leaving. Spider-Man then turns his attention to the woman who shouts to him through the distance, "If you're going to play hero, you're going to need to catch me first, but be careful." She then begins to run off to the left, where she begins to run through an alleyway. Spider-Man then begins to chase after. While being behind her while swinging, he observes how athletic the woman that he is chasing and sees how light she is on her feet as she climbed on top of a 4-story building and faces him as he too is on a building across from her. She then shouts to him from a distance, "Whoa, for someone who got away from Hawks, you sure are slow. Is it by any chance on purpose?" Spider-Man raises an eyebrow under mask and says, "What are you talking about?" The woman then says as she turns around facing away from Spider-Man while swaying her hips around while saying, "All I'm saying is that you must really," bends down slightly to her toes. She turns her head to Spider-Man and smiles, "Love the view from behind." Spider-Man blushes under his mask as says back in response, "WH what? I was not. I was." The woman laughs as she stands up straight and says to him, "Ha ha ha ha, you're funny, Spider. But not fast." Begins to run away and leaping off of rooftops. "Let's play a game. If you catch, I will give you a little treat and tell you whatever you want." Deku blushes under his mask as he gets back to chasing her, but this time with more room to chase. And please play GR8 NES played on Kipo. The woman begins to make her destination towards the shopping district in the south side away from Mutsufu, making about a 3-hour chase for our hero. The woman begins to come up to a gap between her and the other side of the street, where in the middle of the gap vendors were minding their own business. She was hesitant to go through with this until she saw Spider-Man catching up to her, which gave her a smile on her face. She then takes a leap of faith and jumps from a great distance. At the same time, Spider-Man was able to catch up to the spot where she took her leap from and was amazed when she took the jump. But then amazement then turns into fear as Spider-Man's spider sense begins to warn him about the woman in front of him. He then jumps off of the edge as he fires off a web line to a building from the other side of the gap. He pulled himself by using the web line and was able to get close to the woman's foot and pull her to him. She turned her head slightly. But then a short breeze was felt through her hair, as if a bullet was about to hit her. Then Spidey's sense warned him again. But only this time the next hit was at his web line, which was then cut, causing the two to plummet to the ground. But the two were close enough to the building the woman was going to enough, so that Spider-Man was able to his left hand on the ledge and toss the woman to the sky. Spider-Man then gets a foot on the ledge and jumps straight up to catch the woman in a bridal style where her response was. They both begin to plummet once more, but Spider-Man begins to swing away from the area, which then causes the woman in his arms to say, "Whoa." Look at the ground as they begin to swing at a great distance from the ground. They then make their descent to a rooftop with a chimney on the roof. The woman puts her right foot on the ground as she stumbles for a little before landing her back on the chimney and sitting down. Spider-Man then lifts up his right arm and fires two web bullets at the base of her arms while she hands her up on the chimney. She begins to struggle. She looks up to see Spider-Man walking up to her, which then gives her a seductive smile which causes her to say, I never realized that you were this into me, showing off your kinky side. What's next? Cosplay?" Spider-Man blushes red face and says back in defense, "No, it's not. I did so you wouldn't get away so I can get answers. Now then, who do you work for? Who paid you to go after the Osborns?" She smiles at him and says back, "Oh, come now. If I wanted to hurt Norman, you think that he wouldn't be able to get out of the car?" Spider-Man's eyes widen from the inside of the mask. "You went after Mr. Osborn to get to me?" She then nods in her head for confirmation and says back, well, looks like the news weren't exaggerating about your strength. The name's Cat, Black Cat, and trust me, Spider. I'm the only one in this city you shouldn't cross." She then adds, "For next time." Spider-Man then backs up away from her and says to her while literally looking down at her, "Look here, lady, He was then cut off by a strange blue glow with minor yellow and black metal in the middle. Black Cat then says after Spider-Man disappears, "Okay, I'm looking." With Spider-Man. He was currently experiencing how a bullet feels when they're shot by a gun. He then hears a voice from whoever is pushing forward by the shoulders. "You're done here, Webs." In a desperate attempt to get loose, Spider-Man was about to fire a web line, but the person came to a hard halt, which then caused Spider-Man to be thrown through a neon sign and crash lands on a flower stand in public, which surprised the citizens. The figure lands down on his feet and grins, while walking to the soon-to-be unconscious Spider-Man. He then says to him as a mysterious aircraft comes in behind the scene, looky at this cookie. Looks like someone should have taken the day off." Spider-Man becomes unconscious nighty. Time skip. Insubordination. That is what you four caused. Spider-Man wakes up to find himself handcuffed along with sitting in a chair in an odd room, which looks a lot like a train cart. But that's not what woke him up. What woke him up was the sound of someone's voice yelling at someone. "I ordered you to bring him in one piece. Not to throw him into a sign and have him crash on a wooden stand. This was supposed to be a silent mission. Which means that no citizens, not even pro-heroes, were supposed to know. Now I have multiple heroes and the Safety Commission demanding that Spider-Man be handed to one of their heroes to take the credit. Spider-Man must not and will not be turned over to Japan's heroes. He will be thrown into the raft with better security, where Endeavor or Eraserhead won't get to him or any other hero with jurisdiction. Just bring him to the rendezvous point in one piece, and I mean it. Fury, out." Then the voice stopped, then came in three other voices. Great job, Nova. Just when the mission was going well, you just had to blow it all up, huh? Said a girl's voice, revealing to be White Tiger. Nova then says back, "Hey, I wasn't the one that decided to shoot a bullet at the webhead's web line. Do we know who fired the first shot?" White Tiger then says back, "Don't change the subject. We had one job, and that is scratch that was. To bring in Spider-Man, silently. No witness, no heroes interfering, and no problems, as if it never happened." Nova then says back, "Well, that would have happened if whoever taken a shot at the spider. Then none of this wouldn't have happened." Then another voice that was young, yet had the tone of a monk. Iron Fist. "My friends, let us take a breath in and exhale. Even though the plan didn't go as planned, we were still able to capture the man of spiders." Goes up to a computer, pulls up an image of the shooter, and I know who it is. I present to you Lady Nagant, our mystery shooter. She was in the area where Spider-Man was reported in. Then another voice came in who was young as well, with a somewhat of a deep voice. Power Man, who said, "So now that we know who is the shooter, let's just finish the mission. Fury is already mad at us, so let's get to the rendezvous point and leave before anything else happens." White Tiger then announces to her team, "Okay, we're in rendezvous point area. We'll get there in 5 minutes." During the entire conversation, Spider-Man was currently trying his best to get out of the cuffs. He then sees a file folder next to him with a paperclip inside holding some notes, and tries his best to grab the paperclip without trying to make a single sound. He is able to grab the paperclip and begins to straighten it out and places it in the keyhole, where he begins to naturally pick the lock. He then hears that the lock on the cuffs clicked and removes them off of his wrists. He then places the quietly next to his spot and gets up nice and slowly and heads to the door in front of Wen. He was only 5 feet to the door when out of nowhere the voice of White Tiger shouts, "He's loose." Power Man then comes out of the pilot rooms and said to Spider-Man, while smiling at the same time pounding his fists together, "How you got nowhere else to run, bug?" Spider-Man turns his head to see that White Tiger is charging at him with razor-sharp claws. He then runs to the door while putting his arms in front of him and activating his other power, which causes his hands to glow. He then breaks through the door. Then, his spider sense starts to warn him. After he breaks through the doors, he then begins to fall. "I was in a jet. What the hell?" Spider-Man shouts as he begins to fall down to a ruined city, while waving his arms around in the sky. White Tiger goes up to the railing on the inside of the jet and looks down and shouts as the rest of the team poke their heads out as well. "Jesus Christ, that guy's insane." Power Man then nods in agreement with a smile and says, "True, but," jumps out of the jet, "I like his style." Nova then shouts as the other's eyes begin to widen in fear. "What the hell just happened? That's it. I'm going after them." Iron Fist then stops him by placing his hand on Nova's right shoulder as he stands to his right and says to him, "No, Luke doesn't just have super strength, you know? He also has invincibility. So in case he crashes on the ground, he will be fine. And since there are no people inside those buildings, he will be able to slow himself down without worrying about endangering lives." Nova then makes a point. "Yeah, but what about Spider-Man? In case Luke doesn't get him." He was then cut off by White Tiger, who says, "If Luke doesn't get him, then we will all be on the ground helping him out." With Spider-Man and Power Man. Spider-Man begins trying to think of some ways to help him out when suddenly he hears a voice coming up to him. The voice behind him shouts, "Yo, Spidey, if the fall doesn't stop, then I will." Spider-Man then says widen eyes under his mask while turning to face him. "What the hell are you doing? Why are you wait, where's your parachute? You're going to die." Power Man then says back, "My name isn't Power Man for no reason. I have super strength and have invincibility. I'm so strong that I won't even feel a thing if we crash on the ground. We both may be going down on the ground, but you're the real one that's going to be taken down." Power Man then straightens his body out and stretches his arms out too. Spider-Man and swings his arms back to his waist, which then causes him to gain more momentum towards Spider-Man. Spider-Man then begins to copy him. As Power Man begins to get closer to Spider-Man, but then his spider sense starts to warn him. But this was odd. His spider sense warned him about something else. He turned around to see Power Man reaching to him, but this was else entirely. He then shouts to Power Man, "Duck!" Power Man stops what he's doing and begins to look around through the air while falling. A duck? Where? Is it to my left or my right? Spider-Man was about to say something until he sees a strange giant blue hexagons start to sprout out from the fence of the city limits. He then says, while pointing to the hexagons, "No, look." Power Man turns his head and body to the hexagons. As they begin to widen in height with depth length, contact your team to. Power Man then says while putting 3 fingers of his left hand up to his left ear, where a hidden comlink was located, to tell them to get out of the city and get help. Already called it in. He then says through the comm, "Guys, we have a situation. Well, an even bigger situation than before. You need to." He was then cut off by an explosion from afar which caused his and Spider-Man's head to turn to the explosion of the jet that was supposed to be used to hold Spider-Man in. Their eyes widen in fear and shock. Spider-Man looks down and sees that they're about the right height for swinging. Spider-Man turns to Power Man and says to him, "We need to see if there's any survivors. Call a truce." Power Man thinks for a moment, then gives a nod, then answers back with, "Deal." Spider-Man then reaches over to Power Man and holds him by the waist. He then swung his hand out while doing his web shooting pose and shot out a web line towards a building nearby and began to swing around. Power Man then says while crossing his arms while Spider-Man is holding him like a woman, "This such bullshit." Spider-Man then says back, "Hey, it's no picnic for me." Looks at the sky where the hexagons are completely done forming around the city like a dome, so I'm guessing that the dome isn't part of your mission to catch me. As they begin to land, Power Man then explains to Spider-Man, "No man, the mission was to bring you to a location where there aren't any people around, so we're here in City O where it's a government-owned destroyed city, so people won't get injured." Spider-Man then says while looking around, "Yeah, now that you mention it, I don't see any people around. Sees smoke and fire from north away from them if I had to guess. I say that your friends must be near the crash site." Power Man nods and says, "Okay, let's go. Also, you said that Gigantomachia and Lady Nagant will appear in this chapter, but I did not see them at all. So you either forgot about them or what you said was nothing but a spelling mistake." "Really? I did not see them appear at all." "Well, the truth is that this is actually a 2-parter. Gigantomachia will appear in here fighting against Spider-Man, Power Man, Iron Fist, White Tiger, and Nova. As for Lady Nagant, after SHIELD comes in to haul both Kraven and Gigantomachia away, Lady Nagant will be like far away from the scene to take the shot at Spider-Man, because as you know she can extend the rifle from her right elbow. Also, I've seen Punisher killing a guy from far away from the city that borders the USA and Mexico. And to try to get a better kill, she uses one of those quirk enhancement drugs to kill him and claim the glory, and just tell some lie about him attacking someone. Also, sorry if the last chapter was a bust. I was feeling whammed at the time. Speaking of who is appearing, I did not expect you to add Black Cat from the 2017 series in. Personally, I prefer the Black Cat from the Spectacular Spider-Man series more, because she has longer hair and her father was the one responsible for Uncle Ben's death, which only added more spice into the series in my opinion. Okay, I have to admit, it was a surprise that you would prefer the Spectacular Spider-Man Black Cat. I used the 2017 version because, well, I'm planning on using the different looks versions of Spider-Man's villains over the years, like for example, for Ock, Sandman, Shocker, and Mysterio will be from Spectacular Spider-Man versions. As you just read, Black Cat along with Electro, Jackal, Kimia, Silver Sable, and the G Nation soldiers and possibly the Vulture, as you just read from Part 1. Norman and Harry Osborn are from the 2017 Spider-Man. For some of the other villains, Green Goblin is from the Spider-Gwen comics. The Spider Monsters will be from the Spider-Man TAS along with Morbius and Kraven as well. So basically, I used some different versions of Spider-Man's villains over the years. Now that Spider-Man can appear at the USJ incident. What about the attack on the training ground by the Vanguard Action Squad dispatched by Shigaraki later on? There is no way that Daily Bugle will know about that. So how will Spider-Man appear to fight the villains there? Unless you decided to go with using that arc as the arc that is completely focused on the Secret Warriors and those 4 heroes in training from SHIELD along with the other students of UA moment in your story. I just don't see how the Forest Training Camp arc can be fit into your story like at all. Okay, so how will the training camp play out is that either Kamala asks her teachers if he could come along, or perhaps SHIELD decides to send in Spider-Man to watch over the kids to make sure nothing goes wrong, or Ock decides to create the Sinister Six and to take down Spider-Man and have Kurguri teleport him to the cave where he will save Koda from Muscular and have the crap beaten out of him, which would be right for the picking. By the way, will Magni, Twice, and Midnight remain alive in this story? I hope they do, because I always dislike the ideas of killing Twice and Midnight off. As for Magni, I merely just didn't want to see Toga cry. It may be true that I have no idea why the R-rated hero, Midnight, named herself that, but I still have respect for her and Twice. As for Magni, I think I'll let her live because Mysterio will be at the meeting preventing Magnus' death, and I have a little surprise for you guys and gals and non-binary peeps about Mysterio. You'll be so shocked that you'll even poop yourselves. One more thing. Who do you plan to have as Toga's love interest in the story? If you are only shipping Izuku with Kamala and Ochako at the moment, Toga's love interest is still going to be Izuku, but she will fall in love with his hero persona instead. P.S. It's called the Shadow Council, not the Court of Shadow. Also, who's ruling Atlantis at the moment between Namor and Atuma? At first, it will be run by Atuma. Then maybe after an assassination attempt by Bakugo, who decides to attack him for the glory. And because he doesn't want some quirkless heroes taking the glory. PSS between the Goblin Nation arc and the Spider Island arc. Which one will be mixed with the Paranormal Liberation War arc? Or are you going to have them all played separately? For the Goblin Nation arc and the Spider Island arcs, I'm going to have them separate from the Liberation arc. Also, I read about the Hydra part. Believe it or not, I recently read a MHA fanfiction where Izuku grew up during the Quirk Age and became the Japanese version of Captain America, and the same with Red Skull, or in that fanfiction, they're both known as Captain Camino Ward and Phantom Skull. So, I'm having both Captain America and Red Skull in both WW2, the Quirk Age, and now because I'm going to use some messed up science fiction with the two, which I will cover in another chapter. Spider-Man lands on a roof of a destroyed building about 3 blocks away from the crash site. Power Man turns his head to Spider-Man and says to him, "I'll take the back, you'll come up from the front. In case, if someone's coming up from the front, I can take them from the back. Deal?" Spider-Man nods his head and says to him, "Deal." Then, they split up. Power Man decided to circle around to the back, while Spider-Man ran up to the front. He quickly decides to use a web line and swings up in front of the wreckage of what used to be his prison transport ship in flames. He then begins to look around. Then, in the corner of his eye, he spots a strange shadow from the corner of his right eye. The shadow was large, huge even, with spikes at its back along with a large rock-like jaw. Spider-Man turns around and sees that the shadow was gone, almost as if it vanished out of thin air. He then shouts, hoping that there would be some kind of response. "Hello? Is anyone here? What is it that you want?" Then a familiar voice from the transport. The voice came from behind and shouts, "You have to be arrested." His spider sense warned him, which then caused him to jump to his right with a backflip. He then stands in a fighting pose and sees that his attacker from behind is White Tiger. Her fighting stance was somewhat similar to a tiger with sharp claws or nails on her fingers. Spider-Man then says jokingly, "Okay, first Buckethead, get me out of nowhere, and now, you. I must be a really popular guy." Tiger then says back, "Yeah, a real All Might character, huh?" Spider-Man's blood then becomes cold after her comparison to him and All Might. He then begins to remember what All Might said to him on that rooftop. "I'm sorry, young man, but you can't be a hero without a quirk." Then again his spider sense kicks in again, but this time, it calls him to turn around and extend his left arm out and flatten his hand up, where he catches what would appear to be a yellow glowing right hand in the form of a fist, which dialed down the glow then turned off. He looks at the figure and sees that it's Iron Fist, the other passenger on the transport. He then says in a calm yet shocked and confused voice, "I don't understand. No one has ever been able to withstand my fists." Spider-Man then says while shrugging his shoulders, "HM." Spider-Man then slides his hand over to Iron Fist's wrist, while sliding his body to his right, with his free open left arm. Spider-Man elbows his stomach from the navel up to his chest 3 times. He then uppercuts him by slamming his fist to his chin, causing him to go down on one knee in pain. Then another familiar voice comes into play. "Okay, Webbs, time for you to take a nap." Spider-Man then turns back to see that Nova, the one who tackled him to a sign, was charging at him again. Then his spider sense kicked in. He then lets go of Iron Fist's wrist and kicks him in the knee, causing him to fall down. Spider-Man then jumps up while turning around to see that Nova and White Tiger's faces collide together and are pushed away from each other. He then lands 3 feet away from them within the middle. Nova gets up after crashing onto the solid ground. He then begins to rub his head through his helmet and says to Spider-Man while looking at him with murderous intent, "Okay, Webbs, you're dead." Then out of nowhere Power Man steps in between the two and shouts, "Enough." Everyone begins to look at Power Man in confusion. White Tiger then asks him, "Power Man, you know what our orders are. Why are you stopping us from following orders?" Power Man then answers back, "Because we have a bigger problem than Spider-Man getting away." White Tiger then says back, "What is a bigger problem than?" Then Spider-Man's spider sense kicked. He grabs Power Man and pulls him to the side, which causes White Tiger to be cut off from her sentence. After Spider-Man pulls Power Man away, 3 long bombo arrows shoot down from the right towards Power Man's spot. Iron Fist then tells everyone, "Take cover." Everyone began to run into the closest alleyway. As they ran into the alleyway, at least roughly around 5,000 arrows were fired off into the sky and quickly aimed down upon the heroes. Spider-Man orders Nova, Power Man, Iron Fist, and White Tiger. "Power Man, make a hole in one of the buildings to take cover." Power Man nods his head and charges at one of the nearest buildings and throws his body into the wall of the building. As he enters the building, he says to his teammates and Spider-Man, "Guys, get in, hurry." Spider-Man and Power Man's team entered the building in a hurry and were able to enter the building before the arrows crashed down. As they entered the abandoned building, they all began to catch their breaths while sitting slumped on the walls. There was nothing in the building except for their heavy breathing until Nova spoke up first. "Okay, I'll be the first one to say it. What in the hell just happened? Look at Spider-Man, you. If it wasn't for you." Nova was stopped by Iron Fist, who said to Nova, "Nova, my friend, calm down. It is understandable that Spider-Man would want to attempt to break out." Spider-Man then says while getting off of the wall that he was resting on that note, "Who are you guys? Why did you might attack me?" The team looks at each other before answering. Iron Fist then answers Spider-Man's question. "We work for SHIELD, and we have been tasked by your Japanese government to take you down and arrest you. We didn't want any civilian nor hero to know that SHIELD had captured you, so that the Hero Safety Commission or any hero would try to take the credit and to protect you." Spidey lifts his eyebrow from under his mask and asks, "Protect me? From whom?" Power Man then answers his question. From possibly Endeavor or Eraserhead or some lame hero from your hometown wanting to take the credit or wanting to question you. That was the whole point of heading to the abandoned part of Mutsufu, to make sure no hero get any bright idea. He then stopped by a voice, speaking loudly from what sounds to be a speaker. It would appear that I not only found my prey, but also some newcomers as well as a new prey. Spider-Man, you've had a lot of enemies since coming back, and one of them wants you head on a platter, and I, Kraven the Hunter, will not only capture my first prey, but also you as well. Welcome, Spider-Man, to your burial ground. Ha 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 ha. As the voice stopped, White Tiger growls as she walks next to Spider-Man and says, "That was Kraven. He's one of SHIELD's top 10 criminals. He must have sent this up to capture all of us, so it will be easy to pick us off rather than taking us all at once. We have to get him now." Spider-Man stops her and says to the group of fellow young heroes, "Hold on a minute. Look, I know that he's a dangerous criminal, but I don't think he planned on capturing us all. Think about it. He said that he will not only capture his first prey. That tells us that we are here. At this time, at this location, we accidentally threw ourselves into his hunting circle." Nova then responds while waving his hands. "Hold on, Webs, are you saying that giant barrier and our ship crashing was all an accident? If so, then who or what was Kraven hunting before we came here?" Power Man then responds, "That giant. Earlier I was trying to tell you guys that I found this weird giant footprint while I was going to come in from the back to cover you guys in case the people who shot you down came over to look for survivors." Nova then stomps over to Power Man and asks, "Now of all time you decided to tell us?" Power Man then says back, "Well, I would have told you if you guys gave me a chance to." Iron Fist then shouts to get their attention, "Enough. We have bigger problems right now, and we need a plan." Which causes Spider-Man to say, "Which I already have." White Tiger looks at him dumbfounded and responds, "Really? So what's you plan then?" Spider-Man then answers, "Simple, we're going to look for Kraven's target and take him down. He trapped us here because he somehow lured his prey here to capture him or her or whatever, and he wanted to capture them. And if we find his prey, take him down, we could lure Kraven into a trap. Because all he has besides tools is his pride in taking down his prey. And I know that I have gotten away from cops and heroes and taken down different villains before. And I know that you have your orders to take me down. But right now I don't need agents of SHIELD, no, I need heroes to take him down. And I'm going to need all of the help I can get. So who's with me?" None of them answers. Spider-Man begins to exit the building, but right before he does, a hand touches his right shoulder, which causes him to turn his head to his right to see Iron Fist, who says to him, "I will follow your lead, bring us to victory." "Yeah, what he said," White Tiger said as she walked next to Spider-Man's left with a smile under her mask. The Power Man walks next to Spider-Man's right and says with a smile, "You were willingly to help me to make sure my friends were okay. So I'll do the same to help you out, dude." Just then Spider-Man looks up to see Nova flying overhead, while saying while having his arms crossed, "Okay, fine, I'll help. But don't think that this means that we're friends or anything." Spider-Man nods his head, "So we just need to find this guy or gal or something. How hard is it going to be?" Just then Nova turns around to meet eye to eye with the biggest, tallest, muscular man with a massive jaw with hair shaped as mountains. Looking at Nova, who has his mouth wide open in shock along with his teammates as well. Nova then says, "Okay, so I think I figured out why the giant barrier is for." Just then the giant man brings his right hand to the air, planning on smacking Nova down, but Spider-Man shoots a web ball at the giant man's eye, causing him to scream in pain. Spider-Man shouts, "Scatter." Then Nova snaps out of it, which causes him to fly over to White Tiger and picks her up with his left arm and uses his right arm to pick up Iron Fist, leaving Spider-Man to pick up Power Man while swinging. The giant man removes the web off of his eyes and roars loudly, which causes White Tiger to ask, "What in the hell is that thing?" Iron Fist answers, "I believe that is Craven's prey." Power Man then says while slamming his fist together, "Well, no matter what will bring him down to our size." Spider-Man then gets an idea. That's it. He may be huge, but he has the same weakness as everyone else. We just need to. Just then his spider sense kicks in, which causes him to scream. Incoming, Nova looks behind them to see a building flying towards them. Nova and Spider-Man make a straight left turn as the building crashes onto the ground. Spider-Man then continues, "I have an idea on how to bring this big oaf to our size. Tiger, you and I will be wrapping his legs with some web while Nova is distracting him in place. Power Man and Iron Fist will be waiting on top of one of the buildings. After me and Tiger are done wrapping his buffalo legs together, I'll give a signal, Nova. You will pick up Power Man and Iron Fist and fly over the mountain man and drop them, allowing them both along with you, punching the back of his head with so much force that he's going to fall down." The young heroes begin to look at each before White Tiger shouts, "Well, you heard the man. Let's move, people." Both Spider-Man tosses Power Man over to Nova, who tosses White Tiger over to Spider-Man. The two catch their partner in their arms. The two swing back around where Nova sees the giant man and smirks as he flies over a building nearby just as planned and places Power Man and Iron Fist on. Nova begins to fly over the giant man's head and says in a mocking voice, "Hey, Mountain Face, you have a nice throwing arm if you were actually aiming." The giant man swings his arms up trying to catch Nova, who keeps on flying up. Spider-Man and White Tiger lands by the giant man's feet quietly and begins to run over to his massive feet while passing by a sign that says in bold letter Ochoko Industries. Spider-Man begins to produce a long web line from using his two hands together. As soon as Spider-Man was nearly finished, White Tiger asks him, while looking at the web rope, "So this stuff comes out of you?" Spidey nods his head. "You are a strange little man. You know that, right?" Spider-Man looks at her while holding the web rope in his left hand. He says to her, "You're not the only one who said that." Gives White Tiger the other end of the web rope. "Remember, we need to wrap both of his legs with this rope. My webs should hold up. If he jumps up, follow as well." Tiger nods as she says, "You know, if you weren't a vigilante, I say that you, me, and the others would be a great team." Spider-Man then says to her, "Ah, so you do have feelings." Tiger then responds in a threatening tone, "Say that again, and I will use you as a scratching post." Jokes aside, Spider-Man and White Tiger begin to follow their mission. Both Spider-Man and White Tiger begin to wrap the giant man's legs in two different circular motions. They began to feel as if the rope was running out. Then, as their final turn, Spider-Man takes White Tiger's rope end and ties his end and her end together and looks up to shout to Nova, "Nova, now!" Nova nodded his head and flew down and made a few turns as he made his way to Power Man and Iron Fist and picked them, where he then made a U-turn behind the giant man's back. Nova shouts before throwing his teammates at the large man's back of his head, "For my final breath, I curse Spider-Man." Nova then throws his friends at the giant man's head. Iron Fist activated his glowing fist and slams his fist onto the giant man's back of his head at the same time that Power Man punches his head as well, while Nova crosses his arms over his own head and slams onto the giant man's head, causing him to crash down onto the ground on his head first. Spider-Man and White Tiger went into separate alleyways to avoid the giant man's fall. As soon as he fell down, Spider-Man was then wrapped around in a net, which was so fast that his spider sense was too late to react. Spider-Man begins to struggle, but stops as he hears an Australian voice standing over him saying, well, it looks like not only you did my dirty work, but also I was able to catch my other prey." Standing over Spider-Man is a 30-something-year-old man wearing an orange sleeveless jacket with tiger patterns all over, along with brown pants, wearing military boots with what looks to be animal nails at the front of the boots. Spider-Man says jokingly, You must be the Greenfield Tigers mascot. Sorry, but you're a little late to the party. Craven laughs as he says to him, Here's the thing, Bug. I know that you were going to use my prey to lure me out. But that's the thing. I am Craven the Hunter. There hasn't been a prey that has never escaped me. Ha ha ha. Just then, a yellow glowing fist comes out of nowhere and hits Craven's face, causing him to crash into trash cans tier by knocking him out. Spider-Man looks over him to see Iron Fist in a fighting stance, while his fist glow is fading. Spider-Man says jokingly, Boy, am I glad to see that fist. Iron Fist nods his head and begins to unwrap Spider-Man while saying, I couldn't see you after the giant fell. Friend Power Man. Nova and White Tiger spotted something nearby and went in to investigate, while I stayed by to look for you, and I'm glad that I did. As soon as Spider-Man gets up, the barrier soon disappears. Spider-Man says to Iron Fist, Well, it looks like the 5 of us make a great team, huh? Iron Fist nodded his head and said, Yes, we do, but I am still under orders to capture you. But you have proven that you can be trusted. Let's just say that after I taken down Craven, you escaped, and he was cut off by Spider-Man, pushing them both away from each other from separate side, crashing onto the walls of the alleyway, where then something what appears to be a bullet hits the pavement. Iron Fist says to Spider-Man, while having his back to the wall, Go, I'll cover you. I'll take Craven while you... Spider-Man cuts him off while pointing to where Craven was at. Yet about that, Craven's gone like Billie Jean. Iron Fist looks to see that Craven is gone, but Iron Fist still says, You should still go, until our paths cross again. Spider-Man nods his head and begins to use his agility to bounce off of the walls and reaches to the top where he shouts, It's freaking night time. Mom is going to kill me. Iron Fist smiles. He then gets a call on his comlink, which was Wit Tiger telling him, Iron Fist, good news. We got our sniper. Do you have Craven and Spider-Man? Iron Fist thinks before saying, No, both Spider-Man and Craven escaped. But at least we have the Giant Man and our snipper. Iron Fist, out. Iron Fist looks up at the night sky and says to himself out loud, I am in your debt. One day, Man of Spiders, our paths will cross again, and when that time comes, I hope that we will become allies, brothers in arms, not agents nor targets.